Well, as he touched on the issue of education in the country, one of the things the president highlighted this evening is that 87% of learners, and I'm reading from the speech, 87% of learners who sat for their matric exams passed. This was, and he reads, for the first time in the history of our country, nearly half of these learners achieved a bachelor pass. And you'd remember that that was a historical moment for the country. We'll analyze a little bit more about what the president had to say about education with Section 27's Matshidiso Lencoasa, who joins us now for reaction. Matshidiso, a good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. There is that celebratory element of the president's speech, right? And what you make of that, if that really is a sign of strides made in the education sector in the country.
Good evening, Naledi. Thank you to you and your team for the platform to talk about this. So yes, definitely there have been, the president has been reflecting on the performance of education on a more positive note and showing the progress that has been made, especially in this country. And I think we should be looking at it in context of the GNU SONA. So this is being the first official SONA GNU. Of course, the president would like to paint a more optimistic picture of the state of the country, including that of our education system. And, you know, that's a noble effort, but we also do have to reflect the realities on the ground, that there are still people who are being left behind. So yes, on the one hand, we are seeing learners who are performing extraordinarily well, and they must be celebrated. But also note that a lot of these learners are performing this well in spite of the circumstances that they're facing, that they are still attending schools that are marred by dangerous pit latrines, for instance, that are made of inappropriate materials, that there's still that inequality, that there's so much overcrowding. And yes, it must be celebrated. But if we want to see that victory for all learners in this country, we really need to do more than just pay lip service to it.
Yeah, I'm keen to hear what you think that more really should look like. I mean, one of the things that we know is going to be a big thing in 2025 is now the enactment of the Bella Act. And now you've got this, you know, this expectation as well that work needs to be done in the ECD space that requires massive investment. The president touching on that as well.
Absolutely. So first of all, when we think of more, we definitely we try to tie the State of the Nation address to the budget speech, because a lot of promises are made, a lot of optimism is shared, which is great. You know, we would love to live in a country like that for everyone in this country. But in order for us to realize that, of course, there needs to be resources that are invested in that. Unfortunately, the basic education space has been marred, unfortunately, by persistent budget cuts. And so it means that there are constrained resources to realize quality basic education for all learners in this country. So that is the first challenge that they have. And then the second, of course, being, in spite of this context, there is also the enactment of the Bella Act, which, you know, has been welcomed largely by civil society, or most civil society organizations that aim for equitable education access, like Section 27. But there is also that acknowledgement that the regulations in that are not going to be free. There needs to be adequate resources to ensuring that we realize that. So it is, again, like, very positive to hear that there is a commitment to ECD, expanding ECD, for example, or focusing on foundational phase education, you know, equipping teachers to be able to facilitate that and to be teachers in the foundation phase. But then at the same time, we have budget cuts towards the teacher training bursary, the Funza Lushaka, which means there are fewer teachers who are going to be able to do that. And so we're really just calling for not just a positive State of the Nation address, but to also see resources and sufficient political will that support some of these promises that have been made by the president.
Yeah, resources and sufficient political will. Did you hear enough on the matter of school infrastructure? Section 27, are you satisfied with what the president had to say about expansion where that's concerned? I mean, quite often we talk about pit latrines. It's still very much a feature in so many of our schools.
Yes, so as we probably have spoken about, the Minister of Basic Education had made a commitment to eradicate all pit latrines by the end of next month, by the 31st of March, 2025, which is an ambitious target. You know, it would be quite historic, but it is an important commitment to make. On the other hand, you know, we would have loved to see a more explicit proclamation on that, on education infrastructure, in the same way that there were more explicit reflections on infrastructure in other areas of the budget, you know, infrastructure towards water, infrastructure towards other areas, which are all really important, but so is education infrastructure. So we're really looking forward to seeing what the government is aiming to do. You know, it's not just making the commitment to eradicate pit latrines, but to actually look at what's stopping us as a nation from actually eradicating that. One of the grants, you know, National Treasury was reporting last year in the last budget speech that for one of the grants, there was a target of introducing 100 schools to have water facilities, and none of those schools actually received water facilities. There was a target to build 30 schools, 30 new schools that year, and only one was built. And those kind of numbers are really worrying and really concerning, because it looks like we're not making the progress that we need to. And so we really just are calling on consistent political will to look at the progress that has been made in Limpopo, for instance, and think about how can we scale that to other provinces like the Eastern Cape, where Limpopo was once behind when it came to pit latrines, but because of the court order and political will that had been reflected in that province, we now see that they are so much closer to eradicating all pit latrines. Can we have that success story across the country? That's really what we'd like to see when it comes to education infrastructure.
Yeah, there's the matter of what happens after our learners have completed basic education, right? Like a quote from the president's speech: to ensure that the economy has the skills it needs, we are increasing the production of artisans through TVET colleges. I mean, that's going to be something that becomes important, Matshidiso, because what happens after these learners leave the schooling system? And is there sufficient investment, from what we heard from the president, in ensuring that there are places for them to get further education?
Yes, absolutely. You know, and it is true. You're right that we shouldn't be looking at education and basic education, especially in a silo, but looking at all the mechanisms. So we move from basic education to higher education. And this is particularly a timely question, because it is 10 years, nearly 10 years since the Fees Must Fall movement, for example. There has been talk about, so what do we do after that? There's been conversations around the missing middle, interventions of that sort. And yes, you know, it is welcome to hear that the president is committing to capacitating TVET colleges and making more accessible opportunities for young people to upskill themselves. But of course, it shouldn't be looked at temporarily, for example. First of all, like you have interventions like the presidential, the PES economic stimulus, which is job creation, but it's only temporary. So it's for 1 year, and then what happens afterwards? So I think that sort of thinking of what happens afterwards, how are we best positioning young people in this country to participate in our economy meaningfully? And that does include investing in those TVET colleges, investing in our higher education system. And it also it really, really needs our government to not just look at, you know, making the promises to increase investment in TVET colleges, but to also see that in our budget speech, to also see, so that we can make that a reality. Because it's one thing to commit to something, but another thing to reduce funding available to that commitment. How do we actually realize that? So yeah, we are definitely looking forward to seeing opportunities for young people to upskill themselves and participate meaningfully in the economy. And it should be looked at holistically. But of course, we need more than just lip service. We actually want to see investment behind this.
Yeah. Matshidiso Lencoasa is, of course, with Section 27. Thank you so much for your time and for your reaction to the President's State of the Nation address. We take a short break. We're back in a moment.